So today, Dr. Sugai is going to walk us through his approach to this, his approach to the material, what he has already found, and where he thinks this can go in the future. And so now I'd like to hand it over to Donald to kind of set the pace and give us a background for this area of frameworks and accountability. And then immediately following Donald's brief comments, we'll hear from Dr. Sugai. Donald?
Thank you, Swint. I'm Donald Eubank, co-founder of Read the Air with Trista Bridges, and we're co-authors of Leading Sustainably, The Path to Sustainable Business and How the SDGs Changed Everything. And if you've been at one of the sustainability roundtables before, we like to start with a very simple view to create some context around the subject so that we're all on the same page. So for Philip's presentation today, we're looking at frameworks that he's analyzed to try to figure out where there's gaps between them, where they cover the same things, what they're missing, and what they do well. So I wanted to just look at how these frameworks are used first. And I think that there's three ways that they're applied. One is for companies to comply with regulations that governments are setting, whether that's for disclosure or for environmental or social issues. And to satisfy investor requirements, investors are using ESG now because they realize that E and S and G dimensions can have cause risks to their capital, and they want to preserve it. Also, they see that there's a benefit from using this lens. And then companies as well can use them internally to understand their own operations and their own strategy and help with their business decision making. Now, today, I think we'll probably mostly be talking about the third one, about internal strategy, risk management, and governance. But our sense is really the importance of ESG is driven by investors. We'd like to see it more happen within businesses used as a tool to determine how to do things, but there's a lot of disagreement about what good ESG is. So I think that's some of what Philip's work goes to address. Now, Philip's talking about value, and while it might be difficult to look at different measurements and determine what their value is in a business context, what we do see is that corporations as a whole are seeing greater performance when they have higher ESG ratings. And this is one of my favorite examples from NICE of the topics companies, where companies are broken into three general categories: high rating for ESG, average, and for low. And what you can see is over almost 20 years time, the companies that were rated high in ESG performance outperformed the market by 60%, outperformed average or low ones, and the low ones really suffered. And then if you just pulled out S for the social dimension, if they were rated high in their social performance, they saw more than 100% appreciation versus average or versus just the standard market. So we know that ESG companies perform well in the market. What we don't know is why necessarily that happens or what actions within the business create that value. So I believe this is what Philip is trying to work towards. In our book, we covered a couple different of the frameworks that we thought were either sort of the basics or the best new ones to apply or the next standard that was coming. So there's GRI, which covers basic things such as employee turnover, injuries on the job, waste management, water usage, carbon emissions. You have the Greenhouse Protocol that looks more deeply into that question of emissions, and CDP, which is about disclosing it. SASB or SASB looks at the materiality of a company and breaks it down by industry, essentially saying what issues have a material importance that an investor would want to know about before they invested in your company. TCFD is looking at climate-related disclosure. So how are you dealing with risks around climate change and a transition from one business model to another business model in the face of climate change? And then you have impact management, which is looking a step further of not simply what are you doing on environmental, social, and governance dimensions, but what is that impact on society? What is that impact on environment? And can you make it a positive impact rather than a negative one? And then sustainable development goals, which I'm not going to get into now, but the 17 goals that essentially set the standard for what businesses could try to achieve. This is a lot of different standards right here, and this is just a snapshot of some of the ones that are out there. And what they're lacking is harmony for many different reasons. One in particular is CDP, SASB, TCFD, impact management. They're investor driven. GRI and greenhouse gas protocol, they maybe are more business driven. You have different people who want to look at different things. They have different specialties that they focus on. So there's a need for harmonization amongst these frameworks. And we see that coming. Two specific examples are one from the International Organization of Securities Commission. They are working to standardize sustainability disclosures for securities, and also from the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. They've had an active consultation that's looking for the same thing, essentially starting to move sustainability reporting and disclosure from something that happens voluntarily and with different frameworks that are not necessarily aligned to something more like GAAP with accounting, where we start to accept general principles of what we are going to report, how we're going to report it, and how we determine if we're doing enough or we need to do more. One other related initiative that I think we should discuss is the Impact Weighted Accounting Initiative, which is being supported by Sir Ronald Cohen, who is considered the godfather of impact investing, together with Harvard University. And they are trying to actually put a monetary value on environmental social impacts. They've created a pilot, couple pilot dimensions that they've worked on. They're using environmental, taking a look at environmental aspects of a company, employment aspects, and products. And this gets a little complex. I'm not really going to get into it, but I just want to give you a snapshot of what that could look like. So they've taken a consumer goods company, a food company, a packaged food company, and they've broken down products from two companies, similar products, Company A and Company B. They've looked at the fiber impact, so that would be the health impact of the product, and they put a monetary value on Company A's of 653 million and B of 323 million. So Company A is doing a better job of delivering positive impact as calculated from a dollar value. At the bottom, though, you see they have a sodium impact, which would be a negative impact if you're taking too much sodium. And Company A has a much higher negative financial impact. You think about healthcare, think about the cost of going to doctors, changing your diet. What does this mean then if you start to look across the whole industry? This is an example of the automobile industry. And they've taken every company, and based on publicly available information that they have, they've done this impact weighted accounting on the impact of that car, positive or negative. And they've been able to then line them up against each other. So on the left side, you have companies that actually have a positive contribution to society. And on the right-hand side, you have ones that have a negative contribution. And not surprisingly, the top of the right-hand side, you have a mid-size EV, an electric vehicle. You have a hybrid. You have a ICE engine, a internal combustion engine subcompact, but that's probably because of energy efficiency. It's gas efficiency. And then when you go over to the right side, you have got a pickup truck, you have an SUV, and these are all fossil fuel powered. And now I can take a look at a single industry and I can quickly determine what companies are producing products that are actually good for society, which ones are bad. So I'll stop there. I'm very interested in hearing what Philip has to share with us today. I think that the work he's done has created an incredible reference to step forward. And with that, I'll just hand it over.
Thank you, Swint. Thank you, Donald. Thanks everyone for coming and joining us today for this discussion. So what I'd like to do is actually share my screen. Great. Okay. So basically what I'd like to introduce you all today to is some of the work that my team and I have been actually focused on for a while now. Thankfully, I have two of my co-authors and research assistants here, Simon and Paul, who are both second-year MBA students at Deutsche Business School here in Kyoto. And basically what I'd like to do is just go through and tell you what we did and hopefully have time to get your feedback. So again, my name is Philip Sugai. I'm a professor of marketing at Dosha University. I've got a recent book called Building Value Through Marketing, and Swint also talked about my older book. And some of the fun that I have is also interviewing executives from in Japan and globally about some of the really great value creating things that they're doing, and turning those into case studies. One of the foundations for our research that I'll be presenting today is based on Hans Rosling and his work with Gapminder. Unfortunately, Hans has passed away, but his children have continued on with the work that he was doing. And one of the incredible pieces of work that he's done, I'm not sure if you've read the book Factfulness, is that he actually started to look at the world through different lenses. One of them is just on basic income levels. And he and the Gapminder team created 4 different levels. So level 1 is people who earn less than $2 a day. So this is extreme poverty. So we talked about the SDGs already. SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 1, is to get rid of level 1, right? Then there's level 2, people who are earning between $2 and $8 a day. Level 3 are earning higher until you get to level 4, where you're making more than $32 a day. Okay, and so if we look at the world back in 1820, so this is what, 200 years ago, a little bit more, about 10% of the world's population was living above the poverty line. Okay, and so I'm wondering, in terms of today, what do you think the percentage of the world's population is who's living in extreme poverty? Again, this is 1820. This is approximately 90% of the world's population is living in extreme poverty. So as of today, what percentage do you think is actually still living in extreme poverty? And what I'd like to do is I'm actually going to go over here. This is live right now. You're seeing the live website for menti.com. If I can just make sure that everybody's awake, I'd like to poll you and ask you to go to www.menti.com and use this code that you can see at the top of the screen, 43641384. So please go to menti.com. Just type in the code 43641384. You can see it on the screen. Use your phone, use your computer, whatever you do, it's fine. And just tell me today, or actually 2018, pre-COVID-19, what percentage of the world was living in extreme poverty at the SDG goal number 1 level of extreme poverty? So again, could you please go to menti.com and hit the code 43641384. We've got votes coming in, and you can hopefully see them coming live on your screen right now. What percentage of the world is living in extreme poverty 2018? And again, I've got 6, 8, 9 people, 10, 11 people out of the 30 plus that are here, 40 here voting. So if I could get as many votes as possible, what percentage of the world's population is living in extreme poverty in 2018? 11, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18. All right, maybe you leave. Yep, please keep going. It's fun to see these things sort of come to life. So 12, 16, 20, I've got 25 people, 26 out of 41, 20, oh wait. Can we get up to 30 answers before I switch back? Maybe 1 or 2 more votes. www.menti.com, 4364-1384. Great, great. 1 or 2 more. Okay, so I will switch back. I'm not sure, Trevor, if you can take a screenshot of this or something. This is fantastic. And if anybody would like to see the final results, this is where you all think today in this audience the world stands as of 2018. Okay, so what I'd actually like to do is show you where we actually stand. So here is, again, Gapminder has fantastic data, so I strongly recommend going and checking them out. here's how we actually did from 1801, which 90% of the world was under the extreme poverty line, until 2018. And just, yeah, basically here we go. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but that line is a little above 10%. So as of today, or this is pre-COVID still, more than 90% of the world is actually above that line. Oops, I'll show it to you again, I guess. But so what that means is, while we have huge gains coming in terms of manufacturing output, business growth, all of those things, and we really are making incredible strides to get the world up in terms of getting up and out of poverty. This is actually coming with a number of negatives, right? And you've all seen these things: employers, employees being taken advantage of, the planet, the temperature seems to be rising. It's rising here in Kyoto today beyond what's comfortable. Consumers, customers being taken advantage of, you name it. There's issues that are going on that are a result of that growth. And so back in 1970, Milton Friedman actually came out with a very famous article where he basically said the social purpose, so the social value that a business can actually create is to its shareholders in terms of profit. So in a free enterprise, private property system, the corporate executive, their job is to make money. As long as we live by the basic rules of society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. And I just want to highlight that for you, because the ethics within the ethical custom within which this was written may be a little bit different in different markets around the world. And so ethics just clearly, and I'm going to jump over this very quickly, but basically the definition is ethics are they're a system of moral principles. They affect how people make decisions. Okay, so Milton Friedman argued that executives need to help make money in accordance with the law and within the ethical custom of society, and that ethics is helping people make decisions. So that puts the firm obviously in the center of the equation with shareholders. And then the ethical custom from 1970 until actually even today is that customers, partners, planet, employees, society are all considered externalities. And so in Japan, the thing that I like to remind people of is actually back from the 17th century, the Japanese omi merchants, which are from Shiga Prefecture, had this concept of sampo yoshi, three goods. Things, in order to sell something, they need to be good for the buyer, they need to be good for the seller, and they need to be good for society. And so that was right at the heart of how the omi merchants did things. You're probably seeing, if anybody's watching the NHK Taiga drama on Sunday evenings, this is Shibusawa Eiichi, and his whole perspective actually stems from that sampo yoshi way of thinking, which is, no matter what kind of business I start, I don't think primarily about profits. Whenever I deal with a business, I try to be alert not to what is profitable, but what should be done, what's good for society. So Shibusawa Eiichi started 500 for-profit organizations in Japan and 600 social enterprises. He's called the father of Japanese capitalism, okay, because of that. More recently, Kei Matsushita, founder of Panasonic. This is almost at the exact same time. I'm quoting from the English translation, but he wrote this right around the same time as Milton Friedman wrote that New York Times magazine piece. And he said, to me, it's simply unthinkable for a public facility, so he's talking about a company that produces goods and employs a large number of people, not to make a positive contribution to society, right? So we've got a completely different point of view coming out of the West and coming out of the East, and in this part, that's Japan. So when we look back at Hans Rosling, the Gapminder team, and we look at those 4 levels, the question that I have and where we started was, okay, we seem to be doing a wonderful job getting people out of level 1 and into higher levels. Obviously, we still have a huge amount of work to get that 1 billion people who are still at level 1 out of there and up to level 2. That's SDG goal number 1. And then our job is to obviously help people go from level 2 to level 3 and ultimately level 4. But my question is, for those of us who are already at level 4, is the only thing we can and should be doing, looking back down that scale of income and trying to get people up, is there not also a level 5 that we should be aiming at that maybe includes an ethics of responsibility? Can there be a future that we can also be trying to achieve for ourselves as well as our fellow inhabitants of the world? Okay, so, and this idea, I'm not talking about level 5 only for big companies, but this is a cafe across the street. My students who are here will know that I keep talking about Papa John's as an example, but basically, can even Papa John's, which is a small enterprise right across the street from me at Doshisha, can they also implement something that can actually help them get up to that level 5, not just a pursuit of profits? And so when we looked at, okay, so what are the frameworks out there that we can actually build on? Right at that same time, Business Roundtable is coming out with an announcement, 2019, saying, hey, you know what? The purpose of a company no longer is that Milton Friedman thing. We actually have a new purpose of a company, and the purpose is to take care of 7 specific stakeholder groups. So it's not only the firm and its customers, but it's also employees, partners, society, nature, as well as those shareholders that we've already known about. And you can read this from the Business Roundtable. They clearly mention these 7 stakeholders. I've highlighted them as best that I can here. And luckily enough, the Davos Manifesto, World Economic Forum, Davos Manifesto 2020, also talks about the exact same 7 stakeholders. Okay, you can go through, and again, I've highlighted it, but these 7 stakeholders are top of mind for both Business Roundtable, World Economic Forum, and in fact, most of us dealing with sustainability or value-related issues. And again, I've talked about these same stakeholders in my book that was just published last year through Routledge, but the one sort of missing piece in there is if I have a student who comes up to me after I teach this and says, well, professor, how do you actually measure value for these stakeholders? There's not a clear and consistent way to do it. Okay, and that's sort of the missing piece that I've been trying to patch within my own work. And obviously, we've got this whole stakeholder capitalism push, but I'm kind of against the use of these words, and I'll explain why in a second. Because Milton Friedman clearly in 1970, and I don't know if anybody's read his 1970 New York Times Magazine article really in full, but it's a fantastic takedown of socially responsible business. And he does a very good job saying the discussions of social responsibilities of a business are notable for their lack of analytical looseness and lack of rigor. So again, I teach marketing. It's a dream for a marketing professional to have analytical looseness and lack of rigor, because I can build a beautiful brand if you don't hold me to the things that you're asking me to do. And so this is an example, and I apologize if there's a representative from Coca-Cola in the room. I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful, but I just want to show what Milton Friedman was actually talking about. And this is right now live on the Coca-Cola Sustainable Business website. There's the 3rd bullet point on this website right now live says, we aim to collect and recycle a bottle or can for every one we sell and make 100% of our packaging recyclable. That sounds wonderful. It's great in terms of sustainability branding. But then when we look at these types of reports, so this just came out from The Guardian late last year. And once again, what it says, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Nestle named the top plastic polluters for the 3rd year in a row. And I highlighted this over here, which basically said Coca-Cola emerged #1, reflecting more plastic than the next top 2 global polluters combined. These results amount to a significant increase from previous years. So at the very same time that Coca-Cola has this on its website, this is the feedback loop that's actually coming. And so Milton Friedman's words are just like ringing in my ears. We can say whatever we want to say for branding purposes, but where's the analytical rigor? And how are we going to actually put that in place? So this practice, obviously, what Coca-Cola could be accused of? Does any word come to mind? A company that says something like this related to nature, and this actually happens? What's that practice called? Does anybody know? Want to scream out? Or it can't be a like swear word or anything, because I think we're being recorded. But any idea what this is called? Anyone?
I think there are a few answers in the chat. Several people
Okay.
are saying greenwashing.
All right, great. That's it. It's exactly right. Greenwashing. And so, but now let me ask you a question. What would you call this? A major multinational technology manufacturer has a colorful, picture-filled brochure outlining the many ways in which it and its employees volunteer and provide essential support for the surrounding community, while at the very same time legally avoiding the payment of most all municipal, state, and federal taxes due to loopholes in its legal team identified in existing tax laws. What do we call that? What word do we use? And I'll give you another example. A major e-commerce company puts its employees under such stark working conditions that they don't have time to properly use the toilet during their working hours. Because of this, employees are forced to relieve themselves in plastic bags while they continue to do their work. And at the very same time, this company has a website of photos with smiling employees and compelling content showing how well they take care of their employees. What do you call that? In the English language, and again, I can't see the chat until I minimize my window, but I'm assuming you don't have a word for that. It's not greenwashing because it's not related to nature, right? So the word that I'm proposing, I wrote an article for Campaign magazine in 2019, and I'm just publishing another article in a journal later this year. We call it value washing. And basically, this is actions taken by organizations to misrepresent value outcomes for themselves or their stakeholders. So these two examples that I gave you, this is value washing, talking about creating value for employees when maybe you're really not. And same, you're creating value for society when maybe, if we have the right measures in place, you're not. So that's what we call value washing. And the formula for value washing is to avoid giving any clear goals for what you say. Don't provide any objective measures for these goals, so only you can measure them. Other people can't. Avoid transparency at all costs, so don't let the world see what's actually going on. Definitely don't use any objective third-party feedback loops, like the one that I showed you that Coca-Cola suffered from. And work hard to create a complexity of terms, systems, or words that normal, everyday people can't understand. And if you can do one or many of these things in combination, you can value wash. And so I've actually come to the conclusion that stakeholder capitalism has given value washing superpowers, which is why I've started using the term ethical capitalism instead. And we can talk about that in the break or in the Q&A session later, but let me explain why I'm saying this. Okay, so again, the reason, the promotion that we put on about this event was we did look at 15 unique data sources. And again, I was on a limited budget. I would like to have had more of these to look through, but the two students, Simon and Paul, who are here right now would probably have killed me if I asked them to look at any more of these things with me. But we looked through 15 unique data sources. Many of the top ones are here. And the first thing that we did is we collected all impact measures from all of these sources and put them in an Excel spreadsheet. So this is an example. We went to GRI, we downloaded their universal standards. This is disclosure 202-1, and they're talking about employee value, right? So ratios of standard entry level wage by gender compared to local minimum wage. This is the standard from GRI. And this got put into the employee category, right? So this is an employee stakeholder focused impact or disclosure measurement thing. So we did that for all 357 that we collected from all of these different sources. And so it basically looked like this. This is just one screenshot. It's a huge list. And basically, what we did is actually Simon and Paul did was assign categories for each of these. And then I went through and checked with them and made sure that everything was aligned properly. And here's what we came out with. Most of these measurements are looking at employees. About 32% have disclosures related to employees, then the environment, then society, firm, customer partners, and none for shareholders. And when I saw this, I freaked out. Why aren't there any for shareholders? But then it actually turned out that makes sense, because just like Donald introduced at the beginning, ESG is created for the investment community. And the investment community already understands how to measure shareholder value. We've had years of understanding that. So ESG is focused on actually how we understand and account for risks that we can't see across these other stakeholder groups. So that's what we received. And then what we did is we tried to standard qualitative data analysis. You actually go from codes to constructs to meaning. And so then what we did is we went from those codes and we tried to understand what they meant. Like, were there any shared commonalities among all of those impact measures that we put into employee or put into environment or put into society? So we went through and we categorized them into 27, I call them macro indicators. So they're indicators of indicators, so macro indicators. So you can see employees breaks down into fair wages, health, welfare, and safety, development, that's employee development, engagement and satisfaction, diversity and equity, and human rights. Same with environment, waste and pollution. So whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, non-greenhouse gas emissions, or whether it's effluent water, stuff that's coming out of your facilities, water, how you deal with it, energy, products, and their environmental impacts, biodiversity, buildings and land. And society is appropriate taxes, community development, local employment, charity and volunteerism. And I won't read through the rest, you can see them all, but basically this is how they aligned. Okay, so they turned into 27 categories or macro indicators. And then what we did is in those categories, we tried to score how well each indicator actually did at avoiding value washing, right? So now within each category, let's say here in firm, let's look at customer, truth and communications. There's 3 micro indicators focused on truth and communications. We would score those 3 on, hey, is it goal-based? Is there a clearly stated goal that we have an end state? We have an end good that we're driving at, yes or no? Can that end state and the path towards it be objectively measured? Yes or no? Are there independent feedback loops that we can actually see and test? And this had 3 levels. 1 is no. 2 is yes, but we can't find evidence that those exist right now. And 2 points, a full score, is that actually, yes, they exist. And yes, the company is actually openly talking about it. Or the organization that the organization that's whose framework we drew the data from is showing how these things can be checked. And the last piece was sort of a pet peeve of mine in seeing things like gender diversity on your board of directors being scored as a 0 or a 1. So, and in some places just getting benefit just for reporting that instead of the quality of gender diversity. So we asked a last question or gave 1 last point for whether you had a scale variable. Are you actually looking at something that scales, or are you just giving yes or no 0, 1 answers? So the total highest score an indicator could get would be 5 points. The lowest is obviously 0. And so again, it's hard to read. It's much easier to read in the discussion paper if you'd like to read it. But we scored every single one of these on that 5-point scale. Okay, that was the next step across all of those macro indicator categories. And these are the results. So basically, we actually came up with total scores across each of these categories. And what you can see is that most everything here, most everything here has less than 4 points. So only 5.3%, 19 of the total 357 indicators that we've found actually got a 4-point score. None got a 5-point score. So most of them are in the world of kind of okay, but not very clear and not robust in terms of getting rid of value washing. And so that's why I've said that stakeholder capitalism has given value washing superpowers, and why I'm using the term ethical capitalism instead, because stakeholder capitalism talks about this stuff, but then it never holds companies or organizations to clear goals across all of those stakeholder categories. So again, each of these 27 macro indicators, we checked across each of these different frameworks to make sure that they were robust. We weren't just making them up. They weren't coming just from one space. You'll see there are some that we were only having one framework alluding to, and I can talk about those if anybody's interested. But basically, we built in a rigor across frameworks. And then what we did is tried to then build meaning. Like, what does this all mean? When these people are talking about something like engagement and satisfaction from employees, there's 16 micro indicators there. What specifically does that mean? And what goals can we create against those? Okay, so what we ended up doing is creating 80 goals and policies from these 27 macro indicators. Okay, and so this is the recent white paper that we published last week, actually. It's available for free download through my website. And you can email me if you'd like to see the full 150 plus page discussion paper that it's built on. But the thing that I want to just remind you before we get into this is none of this is like my brainstorm, wonderful thinking, like Professor Sugai did all this wonderful stuff. That's not the case. These are actually all coming from the frameworks that we're building this research on. So that's one clear thing. So this is not our creation or our model. This is coming out of the data that we collected. So anyway, before I go into something much further than that, let me just explain and show you what it is that we did. So here is employee. So you can see that there are 6 macro indicator categories for employees: employee diversity and equity, employee fair wages, health, welfare and safety, development, engagement and satisfaction, human rights. And then that breaks down. So here is fair wages. That breaks down to 4 specific goals. And let me explain what that actually means. But you can see against each of these macro indicators, we have clear sets of goals and policies. And you'll find this in the discussion paper or in the white paper. So here's fair wages. So here, employee fair wages. What we actually are finding is that, again, transparent reporting on employees. So you need to have a policy. Organization has a written policy related to the transparent reporting of employment figures. Plus, there's a goal. Organization reports on 100% of the people that it is employed within a calendar year, which includes details of their employment status, permanent, full-time, part-time, temporary interns, new hires, departed, as well as their age, gender, and ethnicity, right? So that's the goal. 100% of employees are measured. And then we build that across each one. One of the questions I've gotten a lot is, how do you define living wage? Actually, this is from Just 2.0 system. And they actually, the policy is organization has a written policy related to the payment of living wage. And the practice goal is employer pays 250% of the applicable national minimum wage for all employees. That's the goal. And so again, across each one of these macro indicators, we have goals. And underneath that, and again, I'm not going to bore you with the details because it gets intense. But then we have the exact measurements and the source. So this one, living wage, I said came from Just, but there's also a BIA talking about financial security and also SDG number 3. So you can see that there's much more detail underneath all of these types of things that are built underneath this. So I won't go into that much detail anymore on any of the other things that I present, but just so that you can see that it's all here. So for environment, we have 6 macro indicators: waste and pollution, water, energy, product services, biodiversity, buildings, and land. So you notice that recently there were announcements about biodiversity and climate change being inextricably linked. Well, luckily, the world's largest ESG frameworks are already talking about these things. And so that's in our model already. So all of these things around carbon neutral and zero non-greenhouse gas emissions as well, like SOx and NOx and those types of things, plus biodiversity impacts and humane compassionate treatment of animals, whatever. So each of these have goals attached to them. And again, I'm not going to bore you with those details unless you'd like to see them. They're all in our paper. But society, we've got fair taxes, local community development, local employment and engagement, charity and volunteerism. Firm, we have transparent financial reporting, the overall governance. So this is G all engaged, embedded in this one area, but it's covered, as well as management capability that, again, I can talk about later if anyone's interested. But again, customer value is truth in communications, privacy, satisfaction, health, welfare, and safety. And partner value. So again, what we can do is, again, when one of my brilliant students comes up to me and says, Professor, you just talked about partner value, how do you actually measure it? I can now say, at least with a little bit of confidence, okay, here's actually how you measure it. It's about supply chain distribution and distribution. It's supporting medium, small, micro, small, medium enterprises and other types of organizations. Environmentally and social responsible practices inside of that supply chain or partner network, and supply chain fair labor practices. And again, shareholder value, we've proxied it as economic value add. And we can talk about this later as well, because that was our best proxy for shareholder value that we could actually integrate into the model. And one of my fears is that we're actually double counting when we do get into an impact weighted accounts or an accounting method to measure all of these goals. I'd like to make sure that we're not double counting when it comes to economic value add. And that's a future to do for us. So then once you've got all those goals, then we can actually start to measure it. So the model that we're proposing is firms can get between 0 and 11 points, basically, across each of those macro indicator categories. Actually, each of the goals, which ratchet up to a macro indicator, but you get 1 point if you have a policy, and then you get 1 to 10 points, depending on where you are from 0 to 100% of achieving that actual goal that we derived from those ESG and sustainability reporting frameworks. So then you can just add them up across employees, environment, society, firm, customer, partner, shareholder, and get a final grade not only for that company, but if we're lucky, we can also get companies within an industry and then markets, and we can start to actually see how value is being created or destroyed based on these different stakeholder groups. Again, I'm using the term ethical capitalism because we hope these goals can be used as a tool to help people make decisions. Okay, not whether companies are ethical or not ethical. The idea is that you've got an ethics-based approach. There's something that people can hang decisions on that are goal-based, objective, transparent, have feedback loops, and vary, okay? And with these, any company, no matter how big, how small, can begin to align their efforts against these goals, okay? So that's the ultimate purpose. So our challenges going forward now is weighting. So one of the key missing pieces here is we don't have any knockout goals. So again, if you're doing abuses, if you're having human rights abuses in your supply chain, that probably should be a knockout goal, that you need to get to that first, but we haven't defined those yet. That's coming soon. But again, is employee value more important than shareholder value, more important than partner value? Where do we actually weight and how do we do it? Is one of the things that we need to really dig into next. One of my challenges is 80 is a lot of goals. I'd like to get this number down, but let's see how we do. Rigor is the next thing. So I'm looking to partner with people who are familiar with impact weighted accounts, with accounting principles, financial standards related to these goals, because this needs that measurement rigor. And then also there's clearly adjustments that need to be done. Employee development in one country like Japan may be completely different than in Cambodia, than in Australia, than in France. So we need to really make this flexible enough so that these goals stay solid, but they're applicable in context of country or region. Okay, so right now we're working to establish a new research center here at Doshisha University on value measurement. That should be done within this year. I'm always looking for collaborators and researchers to join, so please reach out to me if you're interested. We've started working with one company on this already. We've just started. I'm looking for other companies willing to partner with us to make sure this actually works and makes sense, and to adjust as we go. I'm hoping to get all of this data up on a website that we can open up for comments and revisions and feedback and all of that stuff. So I've just hired 2 new research assistants, hopefully to help me with that process. But again, we always need help. We're working on academic papers and a whole host of other things, but anyone interested in collaborating, yoroshiku onegaishimasu. And again, a huge thank you to Sign and Paul, as well as Lunar, for their incredible work in helping me with this, Doshisha for providing funding support, and Masato Yamazaki, who's been very helpful with the whole Bee Market Builder team here. So again, if you'd like to reach out to me, please feel free to email me, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Connect. And I am willing to take any questions, comments, anything from you, as long as you don't yell too loudly at me. I'm looking forward to the feedback. So I'll turn this back over to you, Swin.
Thank you very much. I really like the fact that obviously the rigor of it and the comprehensiveness of it, of course, the complexity of it as well. But in particular, the fact that that he's saying, okay, this is where we are, and we know we have to go further, because it needs to be a collaborative effort among academics and activists and consultants and business people, so that we can come out of this with something that's useful. Thank you for obviously a provocative presentation, giving us language to think about some of these questions that have been in some ways vague and fuzzy, in some ways rubbed over by branding and marketing. Obviously, there is a lot for you to do in this, and there's a lot for us to think about. And so I'd like to right now invite you back at some time in the future so we can have continue this robust discussion. Thank you all for staying with us tonight. I know that there are a lot of things going on that you could use your time on. We'll be back next month. You're all, by virtue of being here, on our mailing list. And so we'll be sharing the details on the next presentation within this week. So thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.